Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story. The smoke started seeping under my bedroom door at exactly 2:47 a.m. At first, my groggy mind tried to rationalize it. I was in that heavy, medicated sleep that pulls you deep under, and my brain was struggling to swim to the surface. I thought maybe I was dreaming, or perhaps my mother, Eleanor, had left one of her fancy casseroles in the oven on a delayed timer. But as my senses sharpened in the dark, the smell registered fully. It wasn't the charred scent of burnt toast or overcooked food. It was thick, acrid, and heavily laced with the sharp, chemical stench of gasoline. It was a heavy, suffocating odor that instantly coated the back of my throat, tasting like bitter poison, and made my eyes water uncontrollably. I jolted awake, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free from a cage. The room, usually pitch black at this hour, was bathed in a faint, dancing orange glow coming from the half-inch gap beneath my solid oak bedroom door. I could hear the crackling sound now. It wasn't a small kitchen fire sputtering on a stove. It sounded like a massive, hungry bonfire was roaring to life right out in the second-floor hallway. The floorboards were actually vibrating with the force of it. Instinct kicked in, the primal human urge to run. I threw the heavy quilt off my body, gasping for air, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. But the moment my right foot hit the floor, a sharp, blinding pain shot up my leg, traveling all the way to my hip, completely shattering the illusion of escape. The heavy plaster cast, wrapping my leg from thigh to ankle, weighed me down like a concrete anchor. I let out a sharp, pathetic gasp, my knee buckling instantly, and I collapsed backward onto the mattress. Couldn't run. I couldn't even walk to the bathroom without help. "Mom! Dad!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the quiet room, rough and panicked. "Fire! There's a fire! Wyatt! Wake up!" I waited, my chest heaving. Silence. There was no sound of rushing footsteps on the stairs. No panicked shouts from my parents' master bedroom at the far end of the hall. No sound of my younger brother Wyatt complaining about being woken up in the middle of the night. There was nothing but the growing, ravenous roar of the flames, the hiss of the wood splintering under the intense heat, and the terrifying sound of the fire consuming the wallpaper just inches from my door. Panic, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, pierced my chest. I reached out blindly in the dark for my wheelchair, which was usually parked right by the nightstand. My hands were shaking so violently that I fumbled with the metal armrests, knocking a glass of water off the table. It shattered on the floor, but I couldn't even hear it over the fire. I nearly tipped the chair over entirely before I managed to lock the brakes, grab the handles, and haul my dead weight into the leather seat. I grabbed the cold metal wheels, pushing forward with all the upper body strength I could muster, my shoulders burning with the effort. I rolled toward the bedroom door and reached for the brass doorknob. The moment my fingers brushed the metal, I yanked my hand back with a shout of pain. It was blistering, searing hot. The heat radiating from the wood was so intense it felt like standing in front of an open blast furnace. Opening that door meant stepping into a literal inferno. The hallway was gone. "Help! Someone! Please!" I coughed violently as the thick black smoke began to billow higher, creeping up the walls and filling the upper half of my room with toxic soot. I spun the wheelchair around, my rubber tires skidding on the hardwood floor, and pushed frantically toward the large double windows facing the front yard. It was a straight 15-foot drop to the lawn, but I didn't care. I would gladly take a broken arm or a shattered collarbone over burning to death in this room. I reached up, unlatched the brass lock, planted my good foot on the floor for leverage, and shoved the bottom sash upward. It didn't move. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the violent stinging in my eyes, and pushed harder, using my shoulders and back. I expected the familiar screech of the old wooden tracks. Instead, the glass merely rattled in its casing, but the frame remained completely, stubbornly frozen in place. It felt like pushing against a solid brick wall. I peered closer through the glass, using the sleeve of my t-shirt to wipe away a smear of condensation and soot. The motion sensor security light from the driveway below suddenly flicked on, casting a harsh white glare against the exterior of the house. My breath hitched. The blood in my veins ran freezing cold, and a wave of nausea washed over me. There, driven deep into the white wooden trim on the outside of the house, were thick, heavy industrial screws holding large, solid planks of plywood tight against the window frame. They were fresh. The silver metal of the screw heads caught the glaring security light, gleaming with a sick, cruel intent. I looked frantically over at the second window. It was exactly the same. For heavy planks of wood, secured by dozens of thick screws, completely sealing me inside. They hadn't been there yesterday afternoon when I looked out at the street. I placed my trembling hands flat against the cold glass. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the stomach, knocking the wind out of my lungs completely. This wasn't an electrical short in the wiring. This wasn't a candle left burning or an accident left unattended. My own family hadn't forgotten me in the chaotic rush to escape the house. They hadn't panicked and left me behind. They had left me here intentionally. The bizarre rumors they had been spreading to the neighbors about my mental health, the sudden isolation from my friends, the weird-tasting food that made me sleep for 14 hours straight. It all snapped into terrifying, crystal-clear focus. They nailed me in. They wanted me to burn. And they were probably standing safely out on the front lawn right now, wrapped in blankets, waiting for the roof of my bedroom to cave in. To truly understand how my own parents could coldly turn my childhood bedroom into a death trap, you have to understand the sick dynamic of my family. You have to understand exactly what happened 6 months before the fire, on the night my life was derailed. I was an architect. At 28, I was doing incredibly well for myself. I had worked 80-hour weeks to earn my spot. I had a great, modern apartment downtown, a solid 6-figure salary, and I was next in line for a major promotion at my firm to become a senior project manager. I was fiercely independent, driven, and most importantly, I was mostly removed from the toxic, suffocating environment of my childhood home. Then there was Wyatt. Wyatt was 25, the undisputed golden child, the baby of the family who could do absolutely no wrong. While I was pushed to excel, criticized for every B grade, and expected to pave my own way, Wyatt was coddled to an extreme degree. He was charming, manipulative, reckless, and chronically unemployed. He bounced from failed business venture to failed business venture. A craft brewery, a tech startup, a crypto trading scheme, always enthusiastically funded by our father, Robert. When Wyatt inevitably racked up massive gambling debts or maxed out credit cards, my mother, Eleanor, would secretly empty her own savings accounts to bail him out so Dad wouldn't find out the true extent of his failures. In their eyes, Wyatt was a misunderstood genius. It all shattered on a rainy, miserable Tuesday night in November. Wyatt had called me from a local dive bar on the outskirts of town. He was slurring his words so badly I could barely understand him, begging me to come pick him up. He said he was too drunk to drive his car, and he had gotten into a fight with the bartender. Against my better judgment, I left work early, drove my sedan through the pouring rain to the bar, and found him stumbling in the flooded parking lot, completely intoxicated. I managed to shove him into the passenger seat of his expensive sports car, a cherry red Porsche, a cheer-up gift from Dad after his last business failed, and told him I would drive his car safely back to his place and just get an Uber back to my own car later. Halfway home, flying down a slick, winding county road, Wyatt started arguing with me. He was belligerent, furious that I had calmly lectured him about growing up and taking responsibility for his messes. He screamed that I was a jealous loser. In a sudden, unpredictable fit of drunken rage, he reached over the center console, grabbing the steering wheel with both hands, and yanked it violently to the right. The heavy sports car hydroplaned instantly, the tires losing all traction on the slick asphalt. The world spun in a dizzying, terrifying blur of oncoming headlights, flashing wipers, and relentless rain. I slammed on the brakes, but it was useless. I remember the sickening, deafening crunch of expensive metal wrapping around the thick, unyielding trunk of a massive oak tree. There was an explosion of shattered glass that tore at my face, the violent deployment of the airbags, and then a blinding, agonizing pain in my right leg that made me scream before everything faded into pitch black. I woke up in a sterile, brightly lit hospital room 3 days later. My right leg had been crushed under the collapsed dashboard. It required 2 emergency surgeries and a network of steel pins and plates just to piece the shattered bone fragments back together. The doctors stood at the foot of my bed with grim faces, telling me I wouldn't be able to walk without a wheelchair or heavy assistance for at least a year, maybe longer. But the physical agony radiating from my leg was absolutely nothing compared to what happened when my parents finally walked into the room. They didn't rush to hug me. They didn't ask the doctors how I was feeling. They didn't cry tears of relief that their eldest son had survived a horrific wreck. My mother rushed straight to the side of my bed, her eyes darting around the room frantically. She gripped my hand so tight her manicured fingernails dug painfully into my skin. "Caleb, honey, listen to me very carefully," she whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying urgency, constantly looking over her shoulder at the closed door. "The police are going to come in here soon to ask you questions about the crash. You have to tell them you were the one driving." I stared at her, my brain fuzzy and slow from the heavy doses of morphine. "What, Mom?" Wyatt pulled the wheel. He grabbed it. He caused the crash. He was drunk. My father stepped forward out of the shadows, his face hard, cold, and entirely unyielding. He looked at me like a business problem that needed solving. Wyatt's blood alcohol level was double the legal limit when the paramedics pulled him out. "Caleb, if the police know he interfered with the wheel, or if they think he was driving that car, he's looking at felony reckless endangerment. Maybe attempted vehicular manslaughter. He'll go to state prison. His life will be completely ruined." "My leg is ruined," I croaked, my voice cracking as I gestured to the massive, elevated cast suspended above the bed. "I could have died. He almost killed me." "But you didn't die," my father snapped coldly, his tone devoid of any paternal warmth. "You survived. You have a clean driving record. You have a good salary and a strong reputation. You can afford a hit to your insurance premiums and a misdemeanor reckless driving charge. You can hire a good lawyer to plead it down. Wyatt has nothing. He is too fragile for a prison environment. He wouldn't survive a week in there. You have to do this for your brother." I looked back at my mother in disbelief. Fake tears were streaming down her perfectly powdered face. "Please, Caleb, if you truly love this family, you will save your little brother. I won't survive the shame if he goes to jail. The stress will literally kill me. Please, be the bigger person." In my weakened, heavily medicated state, burdened by a pathetic, lifelong craving for their approval and love, I broke. When the state troopers finally came into the room with their notepads, I lied to their faces. I said the road was slick, I was driving too fast, I lost control on a curve, and Wyatt was just a sleeping passenger who had nothing to do with it. The fallout from that single lie was immediate, brutal, and devastating. I was hit with a massive fine and lost my driver's license for 6 months. Because of my extensive, debilitating injuries and my complete inability to travel to job sites or client meetings, my architectural firm put me on an indefinite, unpaid medical leave. The promotion vanished instantly, given to a rival colleague. My hard-earned savings quickly drained away to pay for the out-of-network surgeries, the physical therapy I desperately needed, and the expensive defense lawyer my father insisted I hire to keep myself out of jail. Unable to afford the rent on my downtown apartment or even care for my basic physical needs in a wheelchair, I had absolutely no choice but to pack up my life and move back into my childhood bedroom in my parents' sprawling suburban house. I naively thought that taking the fall for Wyatt, saving his life and his future at the cost of my own, would finally earn me their gratitude. I thought they would take care of me, nurse me back to health, and show me the love they always reserved for him. I was so incredibly wrong. Once I was trapped under their roof, stripped of my money and my independence, I instantly became a massive burden. Wyatt never once came into my room to thank me. He didn't even apologize. He continued to go out partying every single night, complaining loudly in the hallway about how the rubber tires of my wheelchair were scuffing the expensive baseboards. My mother would spend hours cooking extravagant, multi-course meals for Wyatt, but would leave me a cold turkey sandwich on a flimsy paper plate on my desk, sighing heavily and rolling her eyes whenever I asked for a simple glass of water or help getting to the bathroom. "You're becoming very demanding, Caleb," she would say, her voice dripping with a toxic, passive-aggressive sweetness. "I'm doing the absolute best I can, but I'm not a nurse. You have to stop acting so entitled and feeling sorry for yourself." I had sacrificed my body, my career, and my entire independent life for them, and in return, they treated me like a repulsive parasite. But the daily neglect and the emotional coldness were only the beginning. Soon, the neglect mutated into something far more sinister, calculated, and terrifying. It started subtly, a slow drip of psychological poison designed to make me question my own reality. I would leave my expensive architectural sketchbooks neatly stacked on my desk before going to sleep, and the next morning, they would be completely gone. When I dragged myself out of the room to ask my mother about them, she would look at me with wide, incredibly convincing, innocent eyes. "You threw them in the trash yesterday afternoon, Caleb. Don't you remember?" she said, pausing from chopping vegetables. "You were crying uncontrollably, saying your career was over and you were useless. I tried to stop you, but you insisted. I didn't throw them away," I argued, my heart rate picking up in frustration. "I was just working on them before I went to sleep. I drew a new floor plan." She gave my father a sorrowful, exaggerated look across the kitchen island. "Robert, he's having those memory lapses again. The doctor at the hospital warned us that the trauma from the crash might cause some severe confusion and mood swings. I didn't have head trauma. My brain was fine. It was my leg that was shattered. But every single time I tried to defend myself, every time I pointed out a missing item or a conversation that never happened, they would seamlessly talk over me, using that calm, deeply pitying tone that makes you want to scream until your throat bleeds. Then came the systematic isolation. My best friend, Samuel, was the only person in the world who knew the actual truth about the car crash. He had been begging me to come stay on his couch, but his apartment was on the third floor of a building with no elevator. Still, he loyally visited me every single week, bringing me coffee and keeping me sane. One gloomy Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in my wheelchair in my room, eagerly waiting for Samuel to arrive. I heard the front doorbell ring downstairs. I rolled my wheelchair quietly to the bedroom door, cracked it open just an inch, and listened closely to the voices in the foyer. "Oh, Samuel, I'm so incredibly sorry," my mother was saying, her voice thick with fake grief. "Caleb simply can't see anyone today. He's having a very, very bad episode." Episode? Samuel's voice sounded confused and instantly suspicious. "What do you mean? I talked to him on the phone yesterday. He sounded perfectly fine. He actually asked me to bring him a specific roast of coffee from downtown. He's hiding his deterioration very well from outsiders." My father's booming, authoritative voice interjected, stepping in to back her up. "The hidden brain injury from the crash is causing severe paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and violent delusions. We've had to lock away all the kitchen knives and the household chemicals. It's best you don't agitate him right now. Seeing you might trigger a severe panic attack." "Violent? Caleb? Are you kidding me?" Samuel scoffed loudly. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Let me just go upstairs and say hi to him for 5 minutes. I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing in my home," my father threatened, his tone dropping to a dangerous, icy growl. "Stay away from my son. He needs intensive psychiatric help and isolation, not a social visit from an enabler." The heavy oak front door slammed shut. I sat in my wheelchair at the top of the stairs, my hands gripping the metal wheels so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. They were cutting me off from my only lifeline. They were deliberately building a narrative for anyone who would listen. That evening, my mother came into my room holding a small paper cup with water and 2 unfamiliar, heavy-looking white pills. "Time for your medication, sweetie," she said softly, acting as if the confrontation with Samuel never happened. I don't take medication anymore. The pain in my leg is manageable with over-the-counter stuff, I replied firmly, refusing to reach out and take the cup. These aren't for your leg, Caleb. They're to help your brain rest. You've been wandering the upstairs halls in the middle of the night, muttering to yourself and pounding on the walls. It's terrifying Wyatt. He can't sleep. I haven't left this room in 2 days because you won't help me down the stairs, I yelled, finally losing my temper, the sheer injustice of it all boiling over. Stop lying to my face. Stop telling Samuel and everyone else that I'm crazy. Her face hardened instantly. The sweet, caring motherly facade dropped like a theater curtain. Her eyes grew cold and calculating. If you don't take these pills right now, Caleb, your father and I will have no choice but to look into having you legally committed to a state residential psychiatric facility. We can't handle your violent instability here anymore. Drink it. Now. I looked at the pills. I knew if I fought her physically, if I threw the cup, they would use it as absolute proof of my violent outbursts. I put the pills in my mouth, took a slow sip of water, and faked a hard swallow, coughing slightly for effect. As soon as she smiled, satisfied, and turned her back to leave the room, I spit the dissolving, bitter pills into a tissue hidden in my palm and shoved it deep into the pocket of my sweatpants. The very next morning, I woke up to find my cell phone completely gone from my nightstand. The EMF radiation from the cellular antenna is disrupting your recovering brain waves, my mother explained simply, pouring herself a cup of coffee when I wheeled into the kitchen and demanded it back. Besides, you were sending highly disturbing, paranoid texts to your old co-workers in the middle of the night. We had to disconnect the line to protect your professional reputation for when you eventually get better. I was completely, terrifyingly trapped. No phone, no internet access, no friends allowed, and absolutely no physical ability to walk out the front door and escape. I started keeping a small, leather-bound journal hidden deep inside a slit I cut into the lining of my mattress. I began obsessively writing down every single conversation, every exact date, every lie they told, desperately trying to hold on to my own objective reality and sanity. I knew they were planning something horrible to get rid of me, but my mind simply couldn't fathom how dark and permanent their final solution would actually be. The final, devastating piece of their false narrative fell into place perfectly when my father brought Dr. Joshua to the house a week later. Dr. Joshua was an older man, but he didn't command the respect you'd expect from a seasoned medical professional. He arrived in a cheap, badly wrinkled suit, carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had been chewed by a dog. He was sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning, constantly dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. He didn't look like a successful psychiatrist. He looked like a desperate man on the run. My parents brought him up the stairs to my room, introduced him briefly, and then conspicuously waited out in the hallway, pulling the door almost completely shut behind them. Dr. Joshua sat heavily on the edge of my bed, not even making eye contact with me. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a cheap ballpoint pen. "So, Caleb," Dr. Joshua mumbled, staring intently at the floorboards, "your parents have expressed deep concern. They tell me you've been experiencing severe, debilitating depression since the accident. Extreme paranoia, suicidal ideation. Tell me about your desire to hurt yourself." "I am not depressed, and I absolutely do not want to hurt myself," I stated clearly, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured, refusing to give him any ammunition. "I am deeply frustrated because I am confined to a wheelchair with a shattered leg, and my parents have confiscated my phone, cut off my internet, and isolated me from my friends. They are actively lying to you to make me look unstable." Dr. Joshua didn't look up. He just nodded slowly, his pen scratching rapidly across the paper. "Patient exhibits severe paranoia. Firmly believes family unit is conspiring against him. Lack of touch with reality," he muttered under his breath as he wrote. "I heard you," I snapped, leaning forward in the wheelchair. "Did you even listen to a single word I just said? Look at my leg. Look at the fact that there is no phone in this room. Ask them to give it back to me right now. If I'm crazy, let me call my primary care doctor at the hospital and get a second opinion. Patients suffering from severe traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress often lack the basic cognitive insight to recognize their own deteriorating condition, Dr. Joshua said mechanically, reading his response as if from a memorized, legally approved script. Given your recent traumatic loss of your high-paying salary, the destruction of your career prospects, and your physical limitations, feelings of utter worthlessness leading to self-harm are incredibly common and expected. I am officially diagnosing you with major depressive disorder with psychotic features. I am prescribing a regimen of heavy sedatives and antipsychotics. He stood up abruptly after exactly 5 minutes. He didn't check my vitals. He didn't ask to see my medical records from the hospital. He didn't even ask about the details of the car crash. He just shoved his notepad back into his battered bag. As he opened the door to leave, my wheelchair was positioned right near the hinge. I held my breath, sitting perfectly still, listening intently as he stepped out into the hallway where my father was waiting in the shadows. Here is the finalized paperwork, Robert. Dr. Joshua's voice was a harsh, desperate whisper. The diagnosis is official and legally binding. Suicidal tendencies, high flight risk, paranoid delusions. But I need the rest of the cash today. I'm not kidding, Robert. My ex-wife's lawyer is taking me to family court for unpaid alimony tomorrow morning. And if I don't hand over 10 grand, the judge is going to throw me in county jail for contempt. Keep your damn voice down, my father hissed venomously. You will get the envelope when I see the stamped file in my hands. And remember our agreement. If anyone, the police, insurance adjusters, anyone, asks, he has been exhibiting these severe symptoms under your care for months. You are his sole, long-term treating physician. I know the drill, Robert. I wrote the dates retroactively. Just give me the money. This divorce is bleeding me completely dry. I slowly backed my wheelchair away from the door, my stomach twisting into a tight, sickening, agonizing knot. Dr. Joshua wasn't a real doctor trying to evaluate me. He was a desperate, debt-ridden fraud going through a brutal, financially ruinous divorce and custody battle. He had likely lost his license or was on the verge of it. My wealthy father had simply bought a fake psychiatric diagnosis with a manila envelope full of untraceable cash. But why? My mind raced, trying to put the terrifying puzzle pieces together. Why go through the incredible risk and trouble of establishing a fake, legally binding medical history? It wasn't just to cover up Wyatt's role in the car crash anymore. The car crash was already legally settled. The fines were paid. This was something entirely new. They were meticulously building a paper trail. They were creating a documented history to prove to the world that I was hopelessly unstable, that I was a danger to myself, that if I were to die suddenly, it wouldn't be a surprise or a murder investigation. It would be a tragic, expected suicide of a broken man. They were planning my funeral. Every night after that horrifying revelation, I dutifully pretended to swallow the heavy sedatives my mother brought me. I amassed a small, terrifying pile of white pills inside a hollowed-out dictionary on my bookshelf. I stayed awake late into the night, sitting in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of my family living their lives downstairs, laughing at the TV, clinking wine glasses, completely unbothered. I was a ghost haunting my own childhood home, just waiting in the dark for my executioners to finally make their move. The golden opportunity to find out the absolute truth, the final piece of the puzzle, came a week later. It was Wyatt's birthday. My parents were taking him out to an incredibly expensive, high-end steakhouse downtown to celebrate. We asked the neighbor's daughter to come over and babysit you, my mother said condescendingly, adjusting her expensive pearl necklace in the hallway mirror while I sat silently in my chair. But she was busy studying. So just stay in your room, Caleb. Don't try to use the stove or the microwave. We left some cold pasta salad in the fridge for you. They didn't even bother to lock my bedroom door. They confidently assumed the heavy doses of sedatives I was supposedly taking every night had turned me into a compliant, drooling zombie. I waited by the window, my heart pounding against my ribs, until I saw Dad's luxury sedan back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. I gave them another 10 minutes just to be absolutely sure they hadn't forgotten a wallet. As soon as the coast was clear, I wheeled myself out of my room, the rubber tires squeaking softly on the hardwood, and navigated down the long hallway to my father's home office. The heavy mahogany door was locked, as it always was. But my father was an arrogant creature of habit. I reached up, stretching my torso painfully, and ran my fingers along the dusty top ledge of the doorframe, retrieving the spare brass key he had hidden there since I was a child. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and slipped inside. The office was dark, smelling strongly of expensive leather, old paper, and scotch. I wheeled over to his massive oak desk and started rapidly pulling open drawers. Most were locked, but the bottom file drawer slid open smoothly on its tracks. I began frantically flipping through the meticulously organized hanging folders. I saw utility bills, bank statements, and then a massive, shockingly thick folder entirely dedicated to Wyatt's credit card debts and legal troubles, staggering, ruinous amounts of money owed to underground casinos and loan sharks. My father was bleeding cash to keep Wyatt alive. Then, my fingers brushed against a thick, sealed manila envelope. The label, typed neatly on a sticker, read, C. Thompson Policy. I pulled it out, resting it on my lap. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely undo the red string clasp winding around the button. I pulled out a thick stack of crisp, densely worded legal documents. It was a life insurance policy. My life insurance policy. My eyes frantically scanned the dense, legal text, looking for the numbers. When I finally found the payout clause, all the blood completely drained from my face, leaving me cold, dizzy, and sick to my stomach. $2 million. I flipped with trembling fingers to the second page. The primary beneficiaries listed were Robert and Eleanor Thompson. The secondary beneficiary, in the event of their deaths, was Wyatt Thompson. I looked closely at the dates stamped at the bottom. The original policy had been taken out years ago, back when I first started my architectural job and they had co-signed for my student loans. It was a standard, responsible thing to do, but there was a new amendment securely stapled to the front page. The payout limit had been massively increased, jumping from $100,000 to $2 million. The effective date of the amendment was exactly 2 months ago. Right around the exact time they started spreading the vicious rumors to the neighbors about my mental health. Right around the time Dr. Joshua, the fake psychiatrist, entered the picture to officially document my suicidal depression. A small, bright yellow sticky note was attached to the last page. It was written in my mother's elegant, looping cursive handwriting. It read, Robert, the grace period for the premium ends in November. We need to finalize the situation before October 15th, so the payout clears the bank in time to settle Wyatt's debts. He's getting physical threats from the collectors. I looked at the calendar on my father's desk. Today was October 12th. I dropped the papers back into the drawer as if they were literally burning my flesh. It all made horrifying, flawless, perfect sense. Wyatt was in deep, potentially fatal trouble with very dangerous people. My father was practically broke. His liquidity destroyed from years of bailing out his golden child. They had drained my college fund years ago, and now, because of the accident Wyatt caused, I had no salary, no savings, and nothing left to give them. Except my life. If a deeply depressed, suicidal man with a legally documented, severe psychiatric history accidentally died in a tragic house fire, the insurance company would pay out the claim without a second thought. $2 million. It was more than enough to save the golden child, pay off the loan sharks, and secure my parents' lavish retirement lifestyle. I wasn't a son to them anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. I was just a winning lottery ticket on a wheelchair, and they were finally ready to cash it in. I carefully put the files back exactly as I had found them, ensuring every paper was aligned. I locked the office door, returned the brass key to the top of the frame, and wheeled back to my room. I sat in the gathering dark for hours. I didn't cry. The betrayal was too incredibly deep, too absolute, too mind-shattering for tears. The family I had loved, the mother who raised me, the brother I had sacrificed my own leg and career to save, were going to murder me in cold blood within the next 3 days. That brings us back to the horrifying reality of the night of the fire. October 14th, the night before their deadline. My mother had brought me an even larger dose of white pills that night, standing over me and watching me closely to ensure I swallowed them. I used my usual trick, hiding them deep under my tongue, smiling weakly at her, and washing them away with a large gulp of water later. I lay in bed, fully awake, my heart thudding against my ribs. I was fully dressed in heavy sweatpants and a t-shirt, waiting in the suffocating, silent darkness of my room. At 1:30 a.m., I finally heard it. It wasn't a loud, violent bang. It was a low, mechanical, rhythmic whirring sound coming from just outside my second-story window. Bzzzt. 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 I carefully lifted the quilt, wincing as a jolt of pain hit my leg, and quietly hauled myself into my wheelchair. I rolled slowly, agonizingly silently across the thick carpet toward the window. The heavy curtains were drawn tightly shut. I reached out with a trembling index finger and parted the fabric just a fraction of an inch, pressing my eye to the glass. The motion sensor security light outside had been triggered. A tall, heavy-duty aluminum ladder was propped against the vinyl siding of the house. Standing near the top of the ladder, perfectly level with my window, was a figure dressed in a dark black hoodie and jeans. The figure was holding a yellow DeWalt power drill, pressing a long, thick metal screw through a pre-drilled hole in a thick sheet of heavy plywood, driving it deep into the solid wooden window frame. The figure leaned back slightly to grab another screw from his pocket, and the sudden motion caused his hood to slip back, revealing his face in the harsh security light. My breath caught painfully in my throat. It was Wyatt, my own younger brother, the brother whose freedom from prison I had bought with my own shattered body. He wasn't just aware of the sick insurance plan. He was the willing executioner. I watched, completely paralyzed by a sickening, swirling mixture of absolute horror and profound, world-ending sorrow, as he worked with calm, terrifying efficiency. He had clearly pre-cut the heavy boards and meticulously drilled the pilot holes earlier in the afternoon when he loudly claimed he was cleaning the gutters before the storm. Now, under the thick cover of darkness, while his brother supposedly slept in a drugged stupor inside, he was simply sealing the tomb. He drove the final screw into the top right corner of the plywood. As the drill spun down with a whine, Wyatt paused. He leaned forward, resting his hand against the wood, his face just inches from the glass, peering intently into the dark room. Our eyes met perfectly through the tiny, 1-inch crack in the curtains. For a terrifying second, time simply froze. I saw his face clearly in the glaring white light. There was absolutely no hesitation, no guilt, no remorse. His eyes were cold, dead, and utterly devoid of humanity. He looked at me the way a butcher looks at a piece of meat. He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just casually pulled his black hood back up over his head, grabbed the drill, and descended the ladder quickly, disappearing into the pitch blackness of the yard. A single tear finally escaped my eye, tracing a hot, burning path down my cheek. The Caleb who unconditionally loved his family, who always wanted to protect his little brother, died right then and there. The man left sitting in that wheelchair was someone entirely different. Someone who refused to be a quiet, sacrificial lamb for their debts. Exactly 30 minutes later, the unmistakable, sickening smell of gasoline hit me. It wafted up through the floorboards and the air vents from the basement, directly beneath my room. They had chosen the origin point with cruel precision. The basement was full of highly flammable old paint cans, thinners, and stacks of dry cardboard boxes. The fire would ignite instantly and funnel straight up the interior walls directly to my second-floor room, effectively turning it into an oven, while my parents' master suite on the complete opposite side of the large house would remain relatively untouched. It would give them plenty of time to safely evacuate, call 911, and perfectly play the roles of the hysterical, grieving parents. I waited in the dark until I saw the first bright orange glow under my door. I knew I couldn't act too soon, or they might realize I was awake and not sedated, and they might come upstairs to finish the job with their own hands. When the smoke became thick enough to make my eyes water and my throat burn, I sprang into action. I wheeled over to my nightstand and frantically grabbed the old, dusty landline phone. My mother had smugly confiscated my cell phone to protect my brain, but in her arrogance, she had completely forgotten about the old, wired landline connection plugged into the wall behind the bed. We hadn't used it for anything but telemarketers in years. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver and pressed it hard to my ear. I prayed silently to a God I hadn't spoken to in a very long time. Click. Hum. A solid, steady dial tone. It was an absolute miracle. I quickly punched 911. But before the call could connect, I needed to physically ensure my escape route was truly gone. I dropped the phone onto the mattress and pushed my wheelchair hard toward the door. I needed to see if there was any chance, any sliver of hope, of getting out into the hallway and down the stairs. I reached for the brass doorknob, and that's when it burned my skin. The fire was already roaring like a jet engine outside my room. The heat was immense, oppressive. Suddenly, a loud, sharp pop echoed from the hallway. The main electrical breaker had tripped from the heat. The lamp on my desk went completely dark. The only source of light left in the world was the terrifying, flickering orange glow under the door. I looked up at the ceiling through the haze. The smoke detector remained completely silent. The little green LED light that usually blinked was dark. They had methodically taken the batteries out of every detector on the second floor. The Wi-Fi router downstairs was undoubtedly dead without power. Even if I had managed to hide my cell phone, the cellular signal in this suburban neighborhood was notoriously spotty, relying entirely on Wi-Fi calling. They really had thought of almost everything. The smoke was dropping lower by the second, forming a thick, dense, toxic black cloud in the upper half of the room. It burned my lungs like inhaling crushed glass and acid. I couldn't breathe sitting upright in the wheelchair anymore. I had to abandon it. I threw myself forcefully out of the chair, crashing hard onto the wooden floor. The violent impact sent a massive shockwave of pure agony through my broken leg, causing black spots to dance wildly in my vision. I bit down on my bottom lip so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood, forcing myself to stay conscious through the pain. I lay flat on my stomach, pressing my face against the floorboards where the air was still marginally breathable. Using my elbows and my one good leg, I dragged my heavy body across the carpet like a wounded, desperate animal, pulling myself inch by agonizing inch back toward the bed where the phone lay dangling by its coiled cord. Every inch was sheer agony. The ambient temperature in the room was increasing exponentially. The paint on the bedroom door began to bubble and pop with sickening, wet sounds. I reached up, my hand blindly grasping in the dark until my fingers finally wrapped around the plastic receiver. I pulled it down to the floor, coughing violently. 911. What is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was crisp, professional, and blessedly clear, cutting right through the terrifying crackle of the approaching flames. I pressed the receiver tight to my mouth. I knew this recording would be permanent. I knew it would be stored on a server forever. I knew my parents would try to spin this to the cops as a tragic accident or a result of my suicidal depression. I had to be my own lawyer in my final moments. I had to build an airtight, undeniable criminal case. My name is Caleb Thompson, I gasped, fighting the overwhelming urge to cough. I am at 442 Elm Street. My house is on fire. I am trapped in the second-floor bedroom. Okay, Caleb, fire and rescue units are being dispatched to your location right now, the operator said, her tone instantly shifting from routine to high alert. Are you able to leave the room? Feel the door. Is it hot to the touch? The door is burning, I rasped, my voice barely a hoarse whisper. I can't get out into the hall. But it's not an accident. Listen to me very carefully. They trapped me in here. Who trapped you, Caleb? Are there others inside the house? My parents, Robert and Eleanor Thompson, and my younger brother, Wyatt. They planned this. They screwed thick wooden boards over my windows from the outside. I watched Wyatt use a power drill to seal me in 30 minutes ago. Caleb, I need you to stay calm. You're saying someone intentionally boarded your windows from the outside. Yes. I forced the words out, making sure my articulation was as precise and clear as possible despite the smoke filling my throat. They used heavy metal screws. It is premeditated murder. They want me to die. They increased my life insurance policy to $2 million exactly 2 months ago. My mother wrote a note saying they need the insurance payout by October 15th to pay off Wyatt's gambling debts. Today is October 14th. This is an execution. There was a fraction of a second of stunned silence on the line. The dispatcher realized instantly she wasn't just handling a routine house fire. She was recording a murder in progress, gathering a dying declaration. I have all of that documented, Caleb. Her voice grew incredibly serious, dropping an octave. The police are responding code 3 along with the fire department. They are less than 2 minutes away. I need you to get as low to the ground as possible to avoid the smoke. I am on the floor. My leg is broken in a cast. I can't walk. Okay, do not hang up. Do you have anything heavy you can use to break the glass? Even if the boards are there, breaking the glass will let some of the smoke out and let emergency responders hear you screaming. I'll try. Leave the phone off the hook, Caleb. I am staying right here on the line with you until they get you out. I dropped the phone on the carpet. The audio recording was secure. I had successfully laid out the exact motive, named the suspects, detailed the financial timeline, and described the exact method of the crime. Now, I just had to survive the heat and the smoke long enough to see them burn in a courtroom. I looked around the dark, increasingly smoky room. My wheelchair was tipped over nearby, useless. I couldn't lift it. I needed something heavy, solid, but manageable from the floor level. My stinging eyes landed on one of my heavy, solid brass architectural paperweights that had fallen off the desk during my struggle. I dragged myself over to it, my heavy plaster cast dragging like dead weight behind me. I grabbed the cold brass, my fingers slipping on my own sweat. I crawled toward the window. The heat was unbearable now, like standing on the surface of the sun. The bottom of the wooden bedroom door was turning completely black, small licks of orange flame finally curling around the edges and eating into the room. I reached the wall beneath the window. I pushed myself up onto my one good knee, using the windowsill for painful support. The smoke up here was blinding and suffocating. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, reared my arm back, and slammed the heavy brass paperweight into the center of the glass pane with all my remaining, desperate strength. Crash. The glass shattered outward, but the satisfying sound was instantly muffled by the thick plywood right behind it. I hit it again and again, clearing the jagged, dangerous edges from the wooden frame, cutting my knuckles in the process. Fresh, incredibly cold night air hit my face through the tiny cracks between the wooden planks. I pressed my nose hard against the gap, sucking in the oxygen like a drowning man breaking the surface of a dark ocean. Through a small, half-inch gap between the heavy boards, I could see the neighbor's house across the fence. Mr. Andrews' house. A light suddenly flicked on in his upstairs bedroom. A moment later, I saw Mr. Andrew, an elderly man who always kept his lawn meticulous, step out onto his back patio in his bathrobe. He had a bright, tactical flashlight in his hand, his golden retriever barking frantically beside him. He shined the powerful beam directly toward my house. The bright light illuminated the thick black smoke pouring out from the eaves and the fresh, unpainted plywood screwed securely over my window. "Mr. Andrew!" I screamed, pushing my face hard against the rough wood, splinters biting into my cheek. "Help! Andrew! Over here! They trapped me!" He stopped dead in his tracks, moving the flashlight beam directly onto my window. He saw the broken glass glinting in the light. He saw the tips of my bloody fingers pushing desperately through the narrow crack. I saw him drop the flashlight on the grass and turn, sprinting back into his house faster than I had ever seen an old man move in my entire life. Sirens. Faint at first, a distant wail in the night, then rapidly growing louder and more urgent. The beautiful sound of fire trucks and police cruisers cut fiercely through the night air. "They're coming, Caleb. I hear them. Hold on." The dispatcher's voice echoed faintly from the phone lying on the carpet behind me. The flames finally broke completely through the bedroom door. A terrifying wall of solid fire roared into the room, instantly igniting the carpet and the bedsheets. The heat was a physical, crushing force, pressing down on my back, searing the skin through my t-shirt. All the remaining oxygen was violently sucked out of the room. I slid down the wall, my strength entirely gone, collapsing back onto the floor. My vision tunneled into a tiny, dark pinpoint. The very last thing I heard before the suffocating darkness took me completely was the beautiful, violent, saving sound of heavy steel axes smashing against the front door downstairs. The sound was like a cannon going off inside my head. I was floating in a dark, suffocating void, my lungs burning, my mind completely detached from the agonizing pain in my shattered leg. But that sound yanked me violently back to reality. It was a massive, splintering crash, wood tearing, metal bending. Another crash followed, louder this time. The heavy oak bedroom door, the one my parents had hoped would hold long enough to turn my room into a crematorium, exploded inward in a shower of burning splinters and black ash. Through the narrow slits of my swollen eyes, I saw a massive figure silhouetted against the raging inferno of the hallway. It was a firefighter in full heavy turnout gear holding a massive steel axe. He looked like an armored knight stepping out of hell itself. He swept a high-powered flashlight across the dense smoke filling the room. The beam cut through the black clouds, illuminating the overturned wheelchair, the shattered window glass, and finally, my crumpled body lying limp on the floorboards. "I have a victim!" His voice boomed through his oxygen mask, distorted but incredibly loud. "Second floor, alpha side bedroom. He is down but conscious." He didn't hesitate. He dropped the axe and rushed toward me, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He dropped to his knees beside me. I tried to speak, to tell him about the screws in the window, to tell him about the insurance money, but all that came out was a wet, pathetic wheeze. My throat was completely raw, coated in toxic soot. "Do not try to talk, buddy. I have you," he said. His gloved hands were incredibly strong. He reached under my armpits and hauled me up. He didn't care about the heavy plaster cast dragging behind me. He simply hoisted my entire body over his broad shoulder like I weighed absolutely nothing. The heat in the hallway was unimaginable. As he carried me through the doorway, the flames actively licked at his protective jacket. Entire sections of the floral wallpaper my mother had picked out years ago were peeling off in burning strips. The house was screaming as the fire consumed the structural beams. He moved fast, thundering down the wooden staircase that was rapidly turning to charcoal. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see the front door, but I felt the sudden, shocking blast of cold October night air hit my face. We burst out onto the front lawn. The sudden influx of pure oxygen made my lungs spasm violently. The firefighter laid me down gently on a bright yellow tarp spread across the damp grass. Instantly, 2 paramedics were swarming over me. Bright lights flashed everywhere. Red and blue strobes painted the trees and the neighboring houses in chaotic, spinning colors. A clear plastic oxygen mask was clamped firmly over my nose and mouth. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The cool, clean oxygen tasted sweeter than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. I was alive. Against all their careful planning, against the plywood and the screws and the gasoline, I was actually alive. I turned my head slightly to the left, peering through the chaotic blur of running firefighters and thick water hoses snaking across the driveway. Standing near the back of an ambulance, wrapped in silver thermal emergency blankets, were my parents and my brother, Wyatt. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. My mother, Eleanor, was currently gripping the arm of a young police officer, her face buried in his shoulder as she unleashed loud, theatrical, hysterical sobs. "My son, my poor sick boy," she wailed, her voice carrying over the roar of the fire engines. "He's trapped in there. We tried to get to him, but the smoke was just too thick. He locked his door. The smoke alarms malfunctioned. We didn't hear anything until it was too late. My father stood next to her, looking appropriately grim and devastated. He had a smudge of soot perfectly placed on his forehead to show he had supposedly tried to fight the fire. He was patting Eleanor's back, shaking his head tragically. He has been suffering from severe paranoid delusions, my father told a second officer, his voice dripping with fake, heavy sorrow. We've been consulting with a psychiatrist. He thought we were out to get him. He must have started the fire himself in a manic episode and barricaded the door. And then there was Wyatt, the golden child, the executioner. He was sitting on the bumper of the ambulance, his head in his hands, perfectly playing the role of the traumatized younger brother. He even managed to produce real tears. The very same eyes that had stared at me coldly through the glass while he drilled the final screw were now weeping for the police. I lay there on the stretcher, breathing in the oxygen, watching them weave their intricate web of lies. A fierce, burning hatred ignited deep inside my chest, far hotter than the fire currently destroying our house. A tall woman in a dark windbreaker stepped into my field of vision, blocking my view of my family. She flashed a gold badge clipped to her belt. "Caleb Thompson? I am Detective Nathan. Can you understand me?" I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "You are going to the hospital right now for smoke inhalation," she said, her eyes sharp and observant. "I need to ask you one question. The 911 dispatcher relayed your call. She said you claimed your family trapped you in that room. Is that true?" I reached up with a shaking hand and pulled the oxygen mask away from my mouth just enough to speak. I looked Detective Nathan directly in the eyes. "The wood is on the outside," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. "Look at the window frame. Look for the drill holes. They wanted the $2 million. I let the mask snap back into place. Detective Nathan's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She stood up, turned around, and looked directly at the second-floor window where the firefighters were currently hacking away at the charred remains of the plywood Wyatt had installed. She pulled a small notepad from her pocket and started writing. I closed my eyes as the paramedics lifted my stretcher into the back of the ambulance. Let them lie, I thought. Let them tell their perfect story to everyone who will listen. The trap was already set, and they were walking right into it. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room stung my eyes. I was lying in a private room, and 4 dripping fluids and painkillers into my arm. A doctor had thoroughly examined me, confirming severe smoke inhalation and some minor burns on my back, but told me I would fully recover. An hour later, the door slowly pushed open. Eleanor, Robert, and Wyatt walked in. They had completely dropped the hysterical act now that they were supposedly alone with me. They looked exhausted, smelling strongly of smoke, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of smug satisfaction radiating from them. They thought they had won. They thought the fire had destroyed any evidence of the plywood, and my survival was just a minor, easily manageable complication. After all, who would believe the word of a certified paranoid schizophrenic over a respectable, grieving family? Eleanor walked up to the side of my bed. She reached out and patted my hand condescendingly. "Oh, Caleb, thank God you made it out," she said. Her eyes were completely dead, devoid of any real emotion. "We were so terribly worried. You gave us quite a scare with your little stunt tonight. The police think you started the fire during one of your episodes. You need to rest now," Robert commanded, standing near the door with his arms crossed. "We will handle the insurance adjusters tomorrow. It's a tragedy about the house, but we will rebuild. Dr. Joshua is coming to evaluate you later today. We might need to keep you here in the psychiatric ward for your own safety." They were already spinning the narrative directly to my face. They were going to use my survival to have me permanently locked away in an asylum. Wyatt stood near the window, checking his phone, looking completely bored by the whole situation. "I didn't start the fire," I said, my voice quiet but incredibly steady. Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Caleb, please stop fighting us. We are your family. We love you. You need serious help." Before she could say another word, the hospital door swung open again. Detective Nathan walked into the room. She was not alone. Behind her was a tall, severe-looking man wearing a sharp business suit. He held a thick leather briefcase. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Detective Nathan said, her voice completely devoid of the sympathy she had shown them on the lawn. "I am glad you are all here. This is Matthew Evans. He is the lead fraud investigator for your life insurance provider." Robert's posture instantly stiffened. Wyatt slowly lowered his phone, his eyes darting between the detective and the man in the suit. "Is there a problem, detective?" Robert asked smoothly, putting on his best businessman voice. "My son is recovering from a severe mental break. This is hardly the time for insurance paperwork." "Oh, we aren't here for paperwork, Robert," Detective Nathan said casually. She pulled a small digital audio recorder from her jacket pocket. "We are here to clear up a few inconsistencies regarding the origin of the fire. You told my officers that Caleb locked his bedroom door and started the fire himself." "That is correct," Eleanor chimed in quickly. "He has been very unstable. And you also stated that you were asleep in your master bedroom and only woke up when the smoke finally reached your hallway," the detective continued. "Yes, the smoke alarms unfortunately malfunctioned," Robert confirmed, his jaw tightening slightly. "That is fascinating," Detective Nathan said. She pressed a button on the side of the digital recorder. "Because Caleb made a 911 call from a landline in his bedroom. He didn't hang up the phone. The dispatcher recorded the entire event until the fire melted the wires. I want you all to listen to something." She hit play. The audio was incredibly clear. The room filled with the terrifying, crackling sound of the roaring fire. Then, my own desperate, raspy voice echoed from the small speaker. "They screwed thick wooden boards over my windows from the outside. I watched Wyatt use a power drill to seal me in 30 minutes ago." Eleanor visibly flinched. The color instantly drained from Wyatt's face. "They increased my life insurance policy to $2 million exactly 2 months ago. My mother wrote a note saying they need the insurance payout by October 15th to pay off Wyatt's gambling debts." "This is ridiculous," Robert shouted, taking a step toward the detective. "He is having a paranoid delusion. He made that up. You can't use the ramblings of a madman as evidence." "I agree," Detective Nathan said calmly, holding up her hand. "But please listen to the rest." The audio continued. The sound of me smashing the window glass with the brass paperweight. The sound of me screaming for Mr. Andrew. And then, the sound of the fire breaking through the bedroom door. The deafening roar of the flames. But beneath the roar of the fire, the sensitive microphone picked up something else. It picked up the sound of voices out in the second-floor hallway, standing right outside my burning door. "Jesus, the fire is huge," Wyatt's voice crackled through the speaker, unmistakably clear, totally devoid of panic. "Keep your voice down," Robert's voice hissed aggressively in the background. "The heat will finish him off in 5 minutes. Just make sure the gas cans are back in the shed." And then the final damning nail in their coffin. Eleanor's voice, clear as a bell, speaking casually over the sound of her son burning alive. "Well, that $2 million better clear by Friday, Robert. I am not losing this house to Wyatt's bookies. Come on. Let's go outside and wait for the sirens." The recording clicked off. The silence in the hospital room was absolute, heavy, and totally suffocating. I looked at my family. The smug satisfaction was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, naked terror. Eleanor's mouth was hanging open, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the small black device in the detective's hand. Wyatt looked like he was going to vomit right there on the linoleum floor. Robert's face was purple with rage and trapped panic. Their perfect murder plan, their intricate web of gaslighting and fake medical records, had just been completely, effortlessly obliterated by a forgotten landline phone. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The heavy silence in the room was finally broken by the sharp, metallic clatter of handcuffs coming off Detective Nathan's belt. Before Robert could even formulate another lie, before he could demand a lawyer or try to use his wealth to bully his way out of the room, 2 uniformed police officers stepped through the doorway behind the detective. Robert Thompson, Eleanor Thompson, Wyatt Thompson, Detective Nathan said, her voice dropping into an official, unyielding cadence. You are all under arrest for the attempted murder of Caleb Thompson, arson in the 1st degree, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. You can't do this, Robert roared, finally losing his composed businessman facade. He shoved his hands aggressively toward the nearest officer. I know the mayor. I'll have your badge for this. My son is insane. He doctored that tape. The officer didn't blink. He simply grabbed Robert's wrist, twisted it painfully behind his back, and slammed him face-first against the sterile hospital wall. The heavy steel cuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp, incredibly satisfying sound. Wyatt immediately crumbled. The tough, reckless golden child vanished instantly, replaced by a terrified, blubbering coward. As the second officer approached him with cuffs, Wyatt dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't my idea, Wyatt screamed, pointing wildly at our parents. They made me do it. Dad told me how to screw the boards in. Mom bought the gasoline. I didn't want to kill him, I swear. I just needed the money for the bookies. Please, I'll tell you everything. Just don't put me in jail. Shut your mouth, you pathetic idiot, Robert yelled from the wall, struggling against the officer's grip. Eleanor completely ignored her husband and her favorite son. She rushed toward my bed, her eyes wide and pleading, completely shedding her fake tears for real ones born of pure desperation. She reached out to grab my hand. Caleb, baby, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please tell them it's a mistake. We are your family. We took care of you. We love you. Don't let them take your mother away. I'll do anything. Please, forgive us. I looked at the woman who had brought me into the world, the woman who had watched me drink poison, the woman who had casually discussed her $2 million inheritance while standing outside my burning door. I slowly pulled my hand away from her grasp. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt completely, entirely empty when I looked at her. You aren't my mother, I said, my voice cold and flat. And I don't have a family. Get her out of my sight. Eleanor let out a sharp, agonizing wail as the detective roughly grabbed her arm, spinning her around and slapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. The 3 of them were forcefully marched out of the hospital room, their protests and crying echoing down the hallway until the heavy doors swung shut. Matthew Evans, the insurance investigator, stood at the foot of my bed, adjusting his tie. He looked down at his thick briefcase. Well, Caleb, Matthew said, shaking his head slowly, I've been investigating insurance fraud for 25 years. I've seen spouses poison each other. I've seen people fake their own deaths. But I have never, ever seen a family plan something this cold and calculated against their own flesh and blood. You are incredibly lucky to be alive. I know, I replied, looking at the empty doorway. What happens now? Now, Matthew said grimly. We bury them. The following weeks were a whirlwind of rapid, relentless police investigation. Once the police had the audio recording and Wyatt's cowardly confession in the hospital room, the rest of their intricate plan unraveled like a cheap sweater caught on a nail. The fire investigators thoroughly examined the charred remains of the house. The second-floor exterior wall was badly burned, but they easily found the long, heavy industrial screws still deeply embedded in the blackened window frame, proving the plywood had been installed from the outside. In the detached garage, which had survived the fire, police found the DeWalt power drill hidden under a tarp. It was covered in Wyatt's fingerprints. They also found the exact receipt from a local hardware store, dated 2 days before the fire, showing a cash purchase for 4 thick sheets of plywood and a massive box of exterior screws. But the most satisfying domino to fall was Dr. Joshua. Armed with my testimony and the recording, Detective Nathan paid a visit to the disgraced psychiatrist's miserable little apartment. Faced with accessory to attempted murder charges, Dr. Joshua completely folded in less than 10 minutes. He handed over the envelope of cash my father had given him, along with the fake medical file he had generated. He confessed on video that my father had paid him $10,000 to explicitly manufacture a history of severe depression and suicidal ideation to justify a potential death. Mr. Andrew, my elderly neighbor, provided a rock-solid sworn statement. He testified that he woke up to let his dog out, heard my screams, and clearly saw the thick wooden boards screwed over my window before the fire breached the room. The insurance company, guided by Matthew Evans, immediately froze all payouts and officially filed massive countercharges against Robert and Eleanor for criminal conspiracy to commit life insurance fraud. They dug deep into Robert's finances, exposing the massive, crippling debts he had incurred trying to save Wyatt from his underground gambling associates. The motive was laid out on paper for the entire world to see. My parents had tried to build a watertight narrative painting me as a crazy, unstable burden. But in their arrogance, they had left a trail of evidence a mile wide. While they sat in separate holding cells in the county jail, completely denied bail due to the severity of the charges and their flight risk, I began the grueling process of physical rehabilitation. My best friend Samuel moved me into his apartment, carrying me up the 3 flights of stairs on his back the first day. I didn't hear from my parents or Wyatt. Their expensive lawyers strictly forbade any contact. And I was completely fine with that. I spent my days working with physical therapists, pushing through the agonizing pain in my leg, driven by one single burning goal. When the trial finally came, I was not going to roll into that courtroom in a wheelchair looking like a victim. I was going to walk in on my own 2 feet. 8 months later, the morning of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. The local media had completely eaten up the story of the wealthy, prominent suburban family who tried to burn their eldest son alive for an insurance payout. The benches were filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and former family friends who had happily believed the lies my mother had spread about my mental health. I stood outside the heavy double doors of the courtroom, wearing a sharp, tailored gray suit. Samuel stood next to me, offering a reassuring pat on the back. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and reached down to grab my polished wooden cane. I wasn't running marathons yet, but the cast was gone, the pins were set, and I could walk. I pushed the doors open and walked down the center aisle. The murmurs in the gallery instantly died down. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight, my steps slow but steady. I didn't look like a broken, depressed man. I looked like a survivor. I took my seat behind the prosecutor's table. Across the room, sitting at the defense table, were Robert, Eleanor, and Wyatt. They were stripped of their expensive suits and pearls, wearing identical bright orange county jail jumpsuits. They looked haggard, aged, and terrified. Robert had lost weight, his face sagging. Eleanor's hair had gone completely gray at the roots. Wyatt refused to even look in my direction, staring at his hands resting on the table. When it was my turn to take the witness stand, I walked up the steps without assistance. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. For 3 grueling hours, the lead prosecutor led me through the entire horrific timeline. I told the jury about the car crash, about taking the fall to save Wyatt from prison. I detailed the systematic gaslighting, the isolation, the confiscated phone, and the fake psychiatric diagnosis from Dr. Joshua. I described, in vivid, unwavering detail, the terror of waking up to the smell of gasoline, discovering the screws in the window frame, and watching my brother drill the final board into place. The defense attorney, a slick, expensive lawyer paid for by liquidating the last of my father's assets, tried his absolute best to tear me apart on cross-examination. He aggressively waved Dr. Joshua's original fake medical file in the air. "Mr. Thompson, the lawyer sneered, pacing in front of the jury box. Isn't it true that you were suffering from severe, documented delusions? Isn't it possible that in a manic state, you nailed your own windows shut, started the fire to punish your family, and then conveniently forgot the details due to your head trauma? I didn't flinch. I leaned forward into the microphone, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. I didn't have head trauma. I had a broken leg. The man who wrote that file confessed to the FBI that my father paid him $10,000 in cash to lie. My brother confessed to drilling the screws himself. And my parents were recorded discussing their $2 million payout while I was screaming for help behind a burning door. I am not crazy. I am just the son they decided they didn't need anymore. The defense attorney had no response. He just looked down at his notes and quietly walked back to his seat. The trial lasted exactly 4 days. The prosecution played the 911 tape twice. They brought in Mr. Andrew, Dr. Joshua, the hardware store clerk who sold Wyatt the plywood, and Matthew Evans from the insurance company. The evidence was an absolute crushing avalanche. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Robert Thompson, guilty. We find the defendant, Eleanor Thompson, guilty. We find the defendant, Wyatt Thompson, guilty. The foreman read through the list of charges: arson, conspiracy, insurance fraud, reckless endangerment. Guilty, guilty, guilty across the board for all 3 of them. Eleanor finally broke down, letting out a horrific, guttural scream as the reality of her future set in. Robert slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Wyatt just sat there, completely frozen in shock. The sentencing hearing was held a week later. The judge, an older, stern woman who had listened to the entire trial with a look of absolute disgust, looked down from her bench directly at my parents. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many terrible crimes, the judge said, her voice dripping with righteous anger. But the level of cold, calculated malice displayed in this courtroom is truly staggering. You did not just attempt to murder a human being for financial gain. You systematically tortured your own flesh and blood. You tried to steal his sanity, his reputation, and his life, all to cover the debts of a reckless child. She locked eyes with my mother. Mrs. Thompson, you sat outside a burning room and worried about your bank account while your son fought for his life. You are completely devoid of basic human empathy. You do not deserve to live freely in civilized society. The judge slammed her gavel down with finality. Robert, Eleanor, and Wyatt were all sentenced to life in state prison, with absolutely no possibility of parole. They were going to die behind bars. As the bailiffs moved in to chain them together and lead them out of the courtroom, Eleanor turned her head, looking at me sitting in the gallery. Her eyes were wide, begging for a single shred of the forgiveness I used to freely give them. I simply stood up, adjusted my jacket, turned my back on her, and walked out the heavy wooden doors into the bright sunlight. I never looked back. The years following the trial were a long, slow process of completely rebuilding my life from the ashes up. The insurance company, realizing how close they had come to paying out $2 million to murderers, offered me a substantial, quiet settlement to avoid any bad press regarding their lack of initial oversight on the policy increase. Combined with the eventual sale of the burned suburban lot where the house used to stand, I had more than enough money to start completely fresh. I didn't stay in that city. The memories were too heavy, the pitying looks from old acquaintances too suffocating. Samuel and I packed up our lives and moved 3 states away, settling in a quiet, vibrant town nestled in the mountains. I legally changed my last name, severing the final, invisible tie to Robert, Eleanor, and Wyatt. I was no longer a Thompson. That bloodline ended with me. I used the settlement money to start my own boutique architectural firm. I poured all my trauma, all my complex emotions, into my work. I became obsessed with light, space, and freedom. I designed and built my own house on a beautiful piece of land overlooking a valley. It is a stunning, modern home, but it has one very specific, defining feature. There are no small, heavy wooden windows. The entire back wall of the house is made of massive, floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass panels that slide open completely to the outside air. There are no thick frames to drill into. There are no hidden locks on the outside. Every single room is flooded with bright, natural sunlight, and every door opens freely. I designed a house where it is physically impossible to ever be trapped. I still have nightmares sometimes. I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, swearing I can smell the sharp, acrid scent of gasoline and burning wood. But then I look out through the massive glass walls. I see the quiet stars shining over the mountains, and I breathe in the cool, fresh air, and I know I am safe. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my deck drinking my morning coffee, I roll up the sleeve of my shirt and look at the pale, jagged burn scars that run along my right shoulder and back. Most people try to hide their scars. They cover them with tattoos or long sleeves, ashamed of the visible reminder of their trauma. But I don't hide mine. I trace the raised lines with my fingers, feeling the uneven texture of the skin. These scars are my medals. They are the absolute, undeniable proof that I went through the fire and I did not burn. They are a reminder that the people who were supposed to protect me tried to destroy me, and they failed miserably. My parents thought they could manipulate my reality. They thought they could break my mind, steal my voice, and erase my existence to solve their own pathetic financial problems. They thought a few heavy screws and a match would be the end of my story. But they forgot one crucial thing. They forgot that when you strip everything away from a person, their career, their mobility, their family, you leave them with nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous opponent in the world. They thought they were dealing with the compliant, desperate son who took the fall for a car crash. They didn't realize they had created a survivor who would use his last breath to ensure they rotted in a concrete cell. They nailed my windows shut, but they couldn't nail shut my truth. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, and I know it's hard to hear about families tearing each other apart like that. But I share this because I know I'm not the only one who has dealt with toxic family dynamics, gaslighting, or betrayal from the people closest to us. Maybe your situation didn't involve a house fire or life insurance fraud, but the pain of not being believed, of being manipulated by your own blood, is universal. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it reminds you that you are not crazy, your reality is valid, and you have the strength to walk away from people who are hurting you, even if you share the same DNA. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to save your own sanity or your life? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you are still here, listening to my voice right at this very second, I want you to drop the letter W in the comments. W stands for winner. That is the secret passcode for the 1% Club. The incredibly small, amazing group of people who actually watch a video all the way to the very end. When I see that W, I know you are a real one, and I appreciate you more than you know. Please hit that like button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear it, and make sure you follow the channel so we can stay connected. I have a lot more to share, and I want you to be a part of it. Stay safe, keep your windows open, and I'll see you in the next one.